you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landis. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Well, hello, welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm Maggie Landis, your host here, and I'm glad that you've joined me today. You are listening to episode 49, Why Letting Go of Dieting is Such a Struggle. And if you're new here and this is your first time listening to me, I want you to know I'm the diet culture disrupting doctor. I'm also a public health nutritionist, and the purpose of this podcast is to give you the most evidence-based information about how your body works, how food interacts with your body, a little bit about eating and cooking and body image and the psychology of all these things, and let you be the judge as to whether or not you want to continue to participate in diet culture or not. I'm really here to shake the tree and unravel some of the misbeliefs that we have adopted over time, and particularly that are getting propagated through the healthcare system. So that's what I'm here to work on, and I'm happy you're here to listen today. As always, if you do enjoy this podcast, please recommend it to other people, and if you were so kind to take just a moment of your time and leave a review or a rating on your podcast player, it really does help with visibility and the search rank and all this sort of stuff, so that the right people that need this message will get it in their ears faster. I really appreciate that. So today, this is going to be a little bit different. I think this is going to be sort of shorter than normal. I never know till after I'm done recording how long it actually is going to be, but I'm calling this sort of like a mini podcast or micro podcast. I have new episodes every Wednesday, and I wanted to have a new episode for this Wednesday. I think it's okay that it's a little shorter. Not every single conversation has to be this heavily researched deep dive. I do like those episodes and I do like preparing them, but sometimes I just have a few thoughts that I want you to hear. And to be honest, some weeks it is, beyond the scope of my capability to produce just mind-blowing, granularly detailed content. It's just too much. And we are all feeling this collective fry, this social exhaustion. It's just week over week over week, at least for me in the last maybe month or two, has been so much harder to navigate and so much harder to avoid the things that kind of stress us out and set us off. So you know what? I want to show up here consistently, though, because that is what's going to keep you moving, keep you abreast of information, keep you educated, and continue to give you momentum as you leave diet culture and learn about all these things. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be super awesome, like I said, the wow factor content. It can just be a good, thoughtful conversation. And I hope that is what you find today, that this offers you some support and a little food for thought as we go through our week here. I'm probably rationalizing this and making a lot of excuses for not having done more research, but really, truly, these 5 things I'm going to mention today are some of the top hurdles, top obstacles that I had to overcome when I finally, after decades of dieting, decided deliberately to quit dieting. There are, so many reasons why that last step away is really tricky, because there are a few things that diet culture and dieting offers us. And that's what I want to talk about specifically today is, I always have women who are in my audience and my community, clients of mine, like they get this fire in their belly and they start understanding what diet culture is, where it is influencing them, how it has kind of damaged their relationship with food and their body image, and they're all rah rah rah, totally in. But there's always this like speed bump at the very end before you get to the other side. And as you know, we've talked about this a lot. This is a process. Leaving diet culture behind is not just a singular decision that you make the decision and then tomorrow's different and everything is just like flipping a switch and your life goes on without ever looking back. This is a process, but even at the very, 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 sort of culmination of this process, there is this kind of speed bump, this obstacle course at the end of these few things that seem to have been benefits of dieting. And so I want to go through, I have five here. We're going to do this real quick, and I'm just curious if this, is resonating with you. And these are things that you've either experienced as you left diet culture, whether you are in the throes of this right now, whether you're deeply dieting and not even convinced yet that you want to leave. These may be things that are very appealing to you, but I wanted to, give it some light and validate it so that you don't think you're crazy for thinking these things, because you are most certainly not. So let's get into it. So the first thing that makes letting go challenging is there really truly is a lot of connectivity when you participate in diet culture. There's a lot of social, I don't want to say advantage necessarily, but it kind of is. Everybody is doing these things and these behaviors, whether it's a specific diet, whether it's a specific program, whether it's working with a specific, quote, professional. It's kind of just regular, like on the sidewalk conversation. And there's more people doing it, more women in particular doing it than not doing it. In fact, it's like so normative and mainstream to restrict what you eat and constantly be micromanaging your food and your body that many people don't even really consider it dieting, air quotes, because it's just eating. Like, to me, this is where I got caught up in it. There's a real blurry line when I started dieting, and I'm sure I was a teenager, and it wasn't because of a specific event or a specific comment or a specific health problem or any specific thing about my size or anything like that. It was just honestly kind of adopting a group mentality that this is what we women, young women becoming adult women, are supposed to do. Honestly, I didn't even give it more thought than that. So there is this piece that is like a built-in support network, because everybody else is doing the same stuff. You can talk about it. We can occupy our time, sharing recipes and sharing stories and collaborating about how we're going to achieve all these common goals. And, it's sort of a herd mentality, kind of, is comfortable for a lot of people to be in a group and be accepted and be sort of seen with that identity. So I hear that, and I see that keeps you stuck. I will, offer you the idea that there's other ways to connect with others, connect with yourself, to be social, to have an identity outside of restriction of your food and managing your body. But to know that that's part of the human experience that diet culture, satisfies is worthy of note, I think. So, number 2, we feel like we will be giving up the control of our shape and size of our bodies. But here's the thing. You never really had control of that anyway. I repeat this over and over and over, particularly in my Facebook group, where this tends to come up a lot with these women. Your weight is a noun. It is not a verb. It's not an action item. Frankly, it is not something that is in your control. And that is like the number one diet culture tenet, if you will, is that your weight is in your immediate control and you should control it. But you really can't do weight, okay? It's not an action verb. You don't do it. So you can't like sit there and will yourself to be bigger or smaller, or have less cellulite or less wrinkles, or make your skin lighter or darker, or your hair blonder or grayer or whatever. I mean, it's not in your control. Now, the argument diet culture will give you is, sure it is. When I did such and such and such a plan, and I downloaded this app and did this for 12 weeks, then I lost however many pounds. Okay. But you weren't directly changing the weight. Maybe you were, doing additional exercise. Maybe you were drinking more water. Maybe you had changed the level of processed foods you were taking in. I mean, there's lots of actionable behaviors that may ultimately contribute to weight loss, but you can take on all those actionable behaviors and your weight may not change. And that does not take away the value of doing the action items. So, to say that this is something we have to let go of, it's really, really hard to accept the fact that you can't control what your body ultimately does with the input in food and exercise and hydration and sleep and medication, all these things. Like, you can't ultimately change your body. So when you stop attempting to control that, it's a huge burden lifted. And that in and itself will reduce your stress, leave you in a more open-minded state to really lean into what your body needs and how you are going to plan to address those needs. So just keep that in mind, that your body is not under your immediate control. Okay, number 3. And this one I thought of very recently because somebody in my Facebook group brought this up, which is really a great perspective. But, there's a lot of, quote, good ideas that all of us may have gleaned from our years and decades of dieting, and there can be some resentment and confusion and even some, sort of shame that we, quote, wasted all this time dieting and now we're going to just quit dieting. Because, your recall, there's a little bit of recall bias when you look back at your dieting experience, just like there is when you look back at anything that has happened in the remote past. You tend to see the best and the worst moments. And so you do kind of cling on to those times where diets, quote, worked for you. And it does feel weird to just throw the whole thing out the window. It's kind of like, and this is the words that my client used, she said, it's like, is it possible to not throw out the baby with the bathwater? And yes, it is. And here's where this happens. And so, because it's confusing, because when we say stop dieting, stop restricting, don't do all those things that you were taught for years and years and years, it's kind of paralyzing almost, right? Because we've gone through dozens of diets. And in some cases, we've learned through the dieting process something about ourselves, something about how our body responds to food, something about cooking, something about our taste preferences, something about nutritional science. I mean, this is the whole problem, is that diet culture and diets and these things, the marketing behind them is very, very slick. And it does start usually with this teeny, teeny, tiny nidus of truth that's what hooks us in, because we believe that. And sometimes it is something that's absolutely objective and true. We wouldn't buy into all these things if they seemed outright ridiculous. We're not that stupid and gullible. And the people selling us the diets know that. But they have this manipulator psychology that they feed us just a tiny bit of fact, a tiny bit of objective information, and that's like the hook, line, and sinker. So then we get reeled into this, diet culture world where there's a very monocular way of looking at things. There's this like super singular view of what is, quote, good or bad and what works or doesn't work. And it becomes one way or the highway. And in that process, we really revere the people feeding us this information, and we lose any sense of rational objectivism. I mean, we just can't see fact from fiction anymore. And that escalates. We get more and more deep into this unrealistic world of, expectations that did start with a tiny bit of truth. But once you are so out of control in that crazy headspace, and you can't see the discerning information anymore. You can't tell, like I said, fact from fiction. And that is exactly what they're counting on, because then that makes us feel like we have somehow failed the program, the system. But sometimes the things we learned could be carried forward into our non-diet approach to eating. Like maybe you learned some recipes that you like. Like it's okay to make a, quote, keto recipe if it's actually food that you like and you liked making it and it was easy and it tasted good and you have the capacity to buy those ingredients. And it doesn't mean everything that you learned is bad. It means the foundation they were laid on was bad. So you can kind of pick and choose. Like maybe you do like, to have brown rice instead of white rice. Maybe you do want to not eat so close to bedtime because it makes your stomach upset or whatever. I mean, you can learn things and not take them to this crazy, out of control, escalated, sort of nonsensical level of diet culture. So hang on to some of the good ideas. That's okay. And then you can bring those with you as you're learning about how to approach food without restriction, without that kind of unrealistic expectation. And you'll have some things to, like, a sort of a starting point. So I just want to validate that you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. All right. Number 4. Why letting go is such a struggle. Number 4, because as much as we don't like being bossed around and told what to do, we kind of do. It's a little intimidating and unsettling not to have structure and rigid boundaries and sort of a plan. So in many ways, dieting is easier than not dieting, because when you are doing a diet, there's no thinking. The creativity, the innovation, the flexibility, this sort of, it's all removed from you. You just do what they say. They tell you, you do it, and there you go. So that makes eating very unfun. That makes living real life very unfun. That makes honoring your hunger and fullness and satiety cues very unfun. That makes participating in social events very unfun. But it's like a security blanket. And when you have this idea of it being pulled away from you, it is really truly a disorienting experience, because there's no scaffolding to lean on. There's no structure, there's no steps, there's no plan, and you become almost panicked because you have to make some decisions like soon. Like if you've got to eat, right? We're all eating every day. I mean, you're probably going to have to make a decision about eating in the next few hours. And without any kind of construct to adhere to, you've got to have some way to make that decision. That is really scary. Now, my opinion is that this keeps a lot of people stuck in dieting because they don't see that there is another way. And I think that the intuitive eating framework meets this need quite well. And I've done other podcasts about intuitive eating, and we talk about that a lot in my Facebook group. I'm not going to go into detail here, but it is not a diet, not a checklist, not a plan, but it is a organized way of thinking about your approach to eating and the psychology behind, food and body. So I feel like when you leave this diet culture behind, pulling intuitive eating into it is going, sort of learning that as you reject diet culture, pulling the intuitive eating framework into your sort of front brain will help give you some of that structure that is missing when you aren't dieting. All right, and here's the final thing. Dieting really appeals to the intellect. This is like what I said earlier, that dieting and diet plans and programs, they do start with a little teensy tiny bit of objective evidence that we are sold out on because it seems smart, it seems intelligent, it seems like it should work. Because it like works on paper. It's nice and neat. And the books and the apps and the program seems so organized and methodical that there's this like magnetic pull to come back for just one more time. But let me just be clear. When you're out of this space, you will be able to recognize this too. You just may not be able to see it right now if you're still dieting, but it is just a different wolf in sheep's clothing. They are all basically the same. They are all based on restriction of food groups, of portions, of calories, of macros, of points, of whatever you can name it. They are all based on restriction. They all consider success in weight loss outcomes, and they are all businesses. They are dependent on our dependency on them. So they require you to make these short-term sacrifices to get these early wins, and there is nothing left after that except for long-term setbacks. And some of those are serious. I mean, how many times do we need to prove it to ourselves that the next one, air quotes, is not going to be different? Neither will the 17th one or the 18th one or the 32nd one or the 33rd one or the 109th one. They are all the same. But we still consider the next new shiny one with a rational intellectual eye, and we assume that there must be some little detail that we missed last time and all the other millions of times, and this time we won't. But that's not how it works. They require us to continue in this cycle of second guessing and doubting yourself. I promise you, you did not miss anything the first 987 times. Diets don't work. If they worked, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If they worked, there wouldn't be so many different ones to pick from. If they worked, we would have all done the one that worked in 1987, and we would be done talking about this by now. So let me just refresh your memory here. This is why letting go of diet culture is such a struggle at the very end, because these are the things that kind of hang on to us. Number one is the social connection. Number two, we have to give up control of our size and our weight. Number three, we are hanging on to the wins and the, quote, good ideas that we got when we were dieting. and we're afraid to let go of those. Number 4, it is scary as heck to not have structure and boundaries and somebody else telling us what to do. And number 5, we don't want to feel dumb because all these diets appeal to our intellect. They look like they should work. But let me reassure you yet again that they don't. And that's what we talk about here on the Eatfluencer podcast, is all the reason diets don't work. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And see, I told you it wasn't going to be a micro one after all. I could have done without all that preamble. But I do appreciate you being here. If you could take a moment to leave a rating and review right now before you turn off your podcast player, I would really be very grateful for that. And share it with your friends. We have new episodes every Wednesday, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you. All right? Thanks for joining. Until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandismd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.